I stood behind the beverage station, ice clinking in crystal glasses while wealthy donors celebrated in the grand pavilion before me. They treated me like I was invisible, just another server in their perfect charity world. What they didn't know was that my husband controlled the largest foundation in the city, and tonight would become the most shocking donation in philanthropic history. If you've ever felt overlooked or dismissed because of how others perceive you, this story will resonate deeply with your soul. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Valentina, and 3 years ago I fell in love with the most extraordinary man I'd ever met, Nathaniel. To the world, he's known as the tech mogul, who revolutionized sustainable energy and quietly built one of the most powerful charitable foundations on the West Coast. But to me, he's simply the man who still opens doors, remembers my favorite flowers, and believes that real wealth comes from lifting others up. We met in the most unexpected place, a community garden in the heart of downtown Millbrook Heights, where I was volunteering to teach urban farming to underprivileged kids. He was there alone, hands dirty, helping to build raised beds for the children's vegetable plots. No entourage, no photographers, just a man who believed in making a difference one seed at a time. Nathaniel never flaunted his success, and that humility drew me to him like a magnet. Even after our wedding, we chose to live quietly, avoiding the social spotlight that seemed to consume so many people in our financial bracket. While he managed his business empire and foundation work, I continued my passion for education, working as a literacy coordinator at the Riverside Community Center. It wasn't glamorous work, but it fulfilled my soul in ways that charity galas and society luncheons never could. Our home in the hills overlooking Millbrook Heights was beautiful but comfortable, a place where we could be ourselves without pretense. We hosted small dinners for close friends, supported causes we believed in without fanfare, and built a life centered around genuine connection rather than social status. Nathaniel often said that the best part of having wealth was the freedom it gave us to choose how we spent our time and energy, and we chose to spend it meaningfully. But tonight was different from our usual quiet evenings. Tonight was the annual Millbrook Heights Children's Education Fund charity event, and it was being held at the prestigious Grandview Convention Center. Nathaniel had been personally invited by the organizing committee, not just as a donor, but as the keynote speaker. The foundation had been considering a major donation to support literacy programs throughout the region, and this event was meant to showcase exactly where the money would go. The irony wasn't lost on me that hundreds of wealthy philanthropists would gather to discuss helping underprivileged children while being served by people they likely considered beneath their notice. I'd seen it before at similar events, the way certain people treated service staff like furniture, invisible until needed and dismissed just as quickly. It had always bothered me, but tonight something stirred in my chest, a curiosity mixed with a desire to understand. That's when the idea formed in my mind, crystallizing like ice in winter air. What if I could see this world from a completely different perspective? What if I could witness firsthand how these champions of charity treated the very people they claimed to want to help? It was more than curiosity, it was a social experiment that could reveal truths about human nature that polite society preferred to keep hidden. The decision formed slowly but surely. I would attend the charity event, but not as Nathaniel's wife, not as the woman who lived in the mansion on Elmwood Ridge. I would attend as part of the service staff, invisible and ignored, able to observe without the filter of social politeness that usually surrounded me. It seemed like a crazy idea, but the more I thought about it, the more necessary it felt. Nathaniel was scheduled to arrive directly from a board meeting across town, so he wouldn't see my transformation. I called the event coordinator and volunteered to help with last-minute staffing needs, explaining that I had experience in hospitality, which wasn't entirely untrue. My years of organizing community events had taught me how to manage logistics and serve people graciously. They were thrilled to have an extra pair of hands. The transformation required careful planning. I borrowed a crisp white shirt and black slacks from our housekeeper, Elena, who was visiting family in Mexico and had left some of her work clothes behind. I pulled my long auburn hair back into a simple ponytail, applied minimal makeup, and practiced the art of blending into the background. The woman who stared back at me in the mirror looked nothing like the Valentina who usually accompanied Nathaniel to public events. I drove to the convention center in my modest Honda Civic, the car I'd kept from my teaching days and still used for community work. Parking in the staff lot felt surreal, like I was preparing for an undercover mission in my own city. The loading dock bustled with catering trucks and event staff preparing for the evening's festivities. Nobody questioned my presence, they were all too focused on their individual responsibilities. The Grandview Convention Center had been transformed into an elegant wonderland. Soft lighting created intimate conversation areas throughout the main hall, while the stage was set with professional audiovisual equipment for Nathaniel's presentation. Fresh floral arrangements adorned every table, and the silent auction displays showcased artwork, vacation packages, and experiences donated by local businesses. It was beautiful, tasteful, and designed to encourage generous giving. I checked in with the catering manager, a harried woman named Beverly, who handed me an apron and a tray without really looking at me. The beverage station was my assignment, keeping glasses filled and ensuring the bar area remained stocked and presentable. It was honest work, and I felt a strange sense of pride in contributing to the evening's success through labor rather than just financial support. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the guests began arriving, I positioned myself behind the bar, polishing glasses and arranging bottles, with the same attention to detail I brought to everything in my life. The first wave of attendees looked exactly as I'd expected. Well-dressed professionals and society figures, all carrying themselves with the confidence that comes from financial security and social position. They moved through the space like they owned it, which, in a sense, they did. The initial interactions were subtle but telling. Guests would approach the bar, make their requests, and take their drinks with minimal acknowledgement of my presence. Some said thank you, others didn't, but most treated the transaction as purely functional. I wasn't a person to them, I was a service, like an elegant vending machine that happened to smile. But as the evening progressed and the alcohol flowed more freely, the true personalities began to emerge. Conversations grew louder. Laughter became more forced, and the polite veneer started to crack in small but noticeable ways. I found myself in the perfect position to observe, close enough to hear conversations but invisible enough that people spoke freely around me. The first red flag came from a couple discussing the event's purpose while I prepared their cocktails. The woman, draped in pearls and dismissive superiority, complained loudly about having to attend another charity function. She called it, quote, performative philanthropy, and wondered aloud why they couldn't just write checks without having to socialize with all these people. Her husband agreed, adding that he hoped the drinks were strong enough to make the evening tolerable. I bit my tongue and focused on my work, reminding myself that this was exactly what I'd hoped to observe. But it stung to hear people dismiss the genuine need these events addressed, to reduce childhood literacy programs to social obligations they had to endure. These were the same people who would pose for photos with oversized checks and smile for society page coverage. The real test of my patience came when a group of women approached the bar, their voices carrying the sharp edge of gossip and judgment. The leader of the group was a tall, imposing woman with silver hair and cold blue eyes, who introduced herself to others as Victoria Pemberton, chair of several charity boards around the city. She had the kind of presence that commanded attention and the kind of attitude that demanded deference. Victoria ordered a very specific martini, extra dry with 3 olives, stirred not shaken, and she watched me prepare it with the intensity of a food critic. When I handed her the glass, she took a sip, paused dramatically, and shook her head with theatrical disappointment. "This is completely wrong," she announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "How difficult is it to make a proper martini? Don't they train you people before they let you work these events?" The other women in her group murmured agreement, though I suspected they were more interested in staying on Victoria's good side than genuinely concerned about cocktail preparation. I apologized sincerely and offered to remake the drink to her specifications, but Victoria had found her audience and wasn't finished with her performance. She launched into a lecture about professional standards and attention to detail, speaking about me as if I weren't standing right there. "This is exactly what's wrong with service these days," she continued, gesturing with her martini glass. "No pride in workmanship, no understanding of excellence. When I was young, people took their jobs seriously, even the simple ones. Now everyone thinks they deserve respect without earning it through competence." Her words stung, not because they were personal, but because they revealed such a fundamental misunderstanding of human dignity. Respect wasn't something that had to be earned through job performance. It was something every person deserved simply by virtue of being human. But Victoria lived in a world where worth was measured by social position and bank account balances, and anyone outside her circle was automatically lesser. I remade her martini with extra care, focusing on the process to keep my emotions in check. When I presented the new drink, Victoria tasted it again, this time nodding with grudging approval. "Better," she said, though her tone suggested I'd barely met minimum standards. "Maybe you can learn after all." The evening continued with similar interactions, each one chipping away at my faith in human decency, while strengthening my resolve to see this experiment through to its conclusion. Guests complained about wait times, criticized the temperature of drinks, and made jokes about the intelligence of service staff. They spoke freely about their own wealth and importance, while dismissing the very people who were working to make their evening pleasant. One particularly painful moment came when I overheard a conversation between two men discussing the charity's mission. One of them, a real estate developer named Reginald Ashworth, questioned whether literacy programs were really worth funding. He argued that some people were simply not meant for education, that society needed workers for manual labor, and that teaching everyone to read might actually create unrealistic expectations. His companion agreed, adding that charity should focus on people who could really make use of education, not waste resources on communities that might not appreciate the investment. They spoke about human potential like it was a finite commodity, distributed unequally by divine design rather than circumstance. Their casual dismissal of entire populations was breathtaking in its cruelty. As I listened to conversation after conversation, a pattern emerged that broke my heart. These people, who had gathered to support children's education, consistently demonstrated contempt for working-class adults. They spoke about opportunity and advancement while treating service staff like they were intellectually inferior. The cognitive dissonance was staggering, and I began to understand that for many attendees, charity work was more about social status than genuine compassion. The breaking point came when Victoria Pemberton decided that the beverage service wasn't meeting her exacting standards. She approached the catering manager and demanded changes, speaking loudly enough that most of the nearby guests could hear her complaints. The problem, she declared, wasn't just the drinks, but the quality of staff they'd hired for such an important event. Beverly, the catering manager, looked mortified as Victoria continued her critique. She pointed directly at me and several other servers, questioning our qualifications and suggesting that we were dragging down the evening's sophistication. Other guests gathered around, some looking uncomfortable but none speaking up to defend us. The social dynamics were fascinating and horrifying to witness. Victoria's solution was to reassign me to what she considered more appropriate work. If she couldn't have competent bartenders, she declared, then perhaps I could be more useful clearing tables and washing glasses in the back area. It was a deliberate humiliation, designed to put me in my place and demonstrate her authority over people she considered beneath her station. Beverly looked at me apologetically but nodded toward the service area behind the main hall. The message was clear: go along with Victoria's demands or find yourself unemployed. I took a deep breath, untied my bar apron, and walked toward the back area, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and anticipation. The real test was about to begin, and I could only hope that Nathaniel would arrive soon to witness the true character of these supposed philanthropists. The service area was a sharp contrast to the elegant main hall, all stainless steel surfaces and industrial efficiency. Stacks of dirty glasses and plates waited to be cleaned, and the large commercial dishwasher hummed constantly in the background. It was honest work, necessary work, but I knew that in Victoria's mind, it was also punishment work, designed to remind me of my place in her social hierarchy. As I began loading glasses into washing racks, I could hear the laughter and conversation continuing in the main hall. The irony was overwhelming. Here I was, cleaning up after people who were supposedly gathered to help others, while being treated like I didn't deserve basic human dignity. The experiment was revealing exactly what I'd suspected, but living it felt completely different from merely observing it. As I worked in the service area, my hands moving mechanically through the endless stream of dirty glassware, I couldn't help but reflect on the stark contrast between the world I was experiencing and the world I usually inhabited. The industrial dishwasher's constant hum provided a rhythmic backdrop to my thoughts, while steam rose from the hot water, creating an almost meditative environment despite the chaos of the evening service. Through the service window, I could see the main event continuing in full swing. The silent auction was drawing competitive bidders, and I watched as people casually bid thousands of dollars on vacation packages and artwork, amounts that represented months of salary for the people cleaning up after them. The disconnect was jarring. These same individuals who could afford to spend $5,000 on a weekend getaway were treating the staff like we were somehow fundamentally different from them, as if our circumstances made us less deserving of basic courtesy. Victoria Pemberton had established herself as the unofficial supervisor of service standards, making regular rounds to ensure that her vision of proper event management was being maintained. Each time she passed by the service area, she would peer through the window with the expression of a general inspecting troops, nodding with satisfaction at seeing me relegated to what she clearly considered appropriate work for someone of my apparent station. But Victoria wasn't content to simply observe from a distance. About an hour into my dishwashing assignment, she decided to pay me a personal visit, bringing with her an entourage of equally judgmental women who seemed to derive entertainment from watching someone they perceived as beneath them struggle with menial tasks. The leader of this group was a woman named Cordelia Blackthorne, whose family name adorns several buildings throughout Millbrook Heights and who carried herself with the entitlement of inherited wealth. "Well, well," Victoria announced as she entered the service area, her voice dripping with condescension. "How are we managing back here? I trust the change of assignment has been educational for you." Her companions giggled like school children witnessing someone else's detention, their expensive jewelry catching the harsh fluorescent lights of the work area. I looked up from the industrial sink, my hands pruned from the hot water and harsh detergents, and managed what I hoped was a pleasant expression. "I'm managing just fine, thank you. Honest work has its own rewards." My response seemed to surprise them, as if they'd expected me to be properly ashamed of my circumstances. Cordelia stepped forward, her silk dress and diamond earrings absurdly out of place in the utilitarian service area. "Honest work," she repeated, as if testing the words for their validity. "That's an interesting perspective. Tell me, is this the career path you always envisioned for yourself? Did you wake up one morning and think, I'd like to spend my evenings washing other people's glasses?" The question was designed to humiliate, to force me to acknowledge what they saw as the failure that had led me to this moment. But their assumption revealed more about their worldview than it did about my circumstances. They genuinely believed that people who worked in service industries had somehow failed at life, that anyone with intelligence or ambition would naturally rise above such positions. The idea that someone might choose service work, or that circumstances beyond individual control might influence career paths, was completely foreign to their experience. "Actually," I replied, continuing to work as I spoke, "I find great satisfaction in contributing to events like this one. Every person here tonight is able to enjoy themselves, partly because of the work being done behind the scenes. There's dignity in supporting something larger than yourself." My words seemed to confuse them, as if I'd responded in a foreign language. Victoria's eyes narrowed with the look of someone whose authority had been questioned. "Dignity," she said slowly, "is something that must be earned through achievement and contribution to society. Working in service, while perhaps necessary, hardly qualifies as significant contribution. People in your position should focus on gratitude for the opportunity to work, not on inflated ideas about the importance of manual labor." Her worldview was so fundamentally different from mine that for a moment I was speechless. The idea that human worth could be measured by job title or social position was not just wrong, it was dangerous. It created a hierarchy that justified treating entire groups of people as less valuable, less deserving of respect and consideration. But before I could formulate a response, Cordelia decided to escalate the conversation. "You know what I think?" Cordelia said, moving closer to the sink where I was working. "I think you have attitude problems. People in service positions need to understand their place in the social order. When someone like Victoria gives you feedback or direction, the appropriate response is gratitude, not philosophical discussions about dignity and contribution." The other women murmured agreement, emboldened by Cordelia's increasingly aggressive tone. I realized that this had become entertainment for them, a chance to demonstrate their social dominance over someone they perceived as powerless. They were performing for each other, showing off their ability to put someone in their place. "I appreciate feedback," I said carefully, But I also believe that all work deserves respect, regardless of where it falls in any social hierarchy. The people preparing your food, serving your drinks, and maintaining this beautiful venue are making your evening possible. That contribution deserves acknowledgement, not condescension. My response triggered something in Victoria that went beyond mere annoyance. Her face flushed with anger, and her voice took on a sharp edge that cut through the background noise of the service area. "Listen to me very carefully," she said, stepping close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the scent of alcohol. "I don't know where you get the audacity to lecture your betters about respect and contribution, but I can tell you exactly where it ends. Right here, right now." Cordelia joined Victoria directly beside the sink, creating an intimidating presence that was clearly designed to overwhelm me. "You need to understand something fundamental," Cordelia continued where Victoria left off. "People like us create the wealth that makes events like this possible. We build businesses, employ workers, and fund charitable causes. We are the engines of society, the ones who make things happen. People like you are recipients of our generosity, beneficiaries of our success." The arrogance was breathtaking, but what struck me most was their genuine belief in their own narrative. They had convinced themselves that their privilege was not only deserved, but beneficial to society as a whole. In their minds, the social hierarchy wasn't just natural, it was virtuous, with themselves positioned as benevolent leaders graciously providing opportunities for lesser beings to serve them. "Without people like us," Victoria added, "there would be no charity events, no jobs for people like you, no economic activity to support the communities we're here to help tonight. Your very livelihood depends on our success, and yet you have the presumption to lecture us about respect? The appropriate response to our presence should be gratitude, not defiance." Their words revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how society actually functions. They saw themselves as job creators and wealth generators, but they failed to recognize that their success depended entirely on the labor and consumption of the very people they were dismissing. Without workers to build their businesses, customers to buy their products, and service staff to maintain their lifestyles, their wealth would be meaningless. But pointing this out would only escalate the confrontation, and I still wanted to see how far their cruelty would extend. As if summoned by the tension in the room, Beverly, the catering manager, appeared in the service area doorway, looking nervous and apologetic. She had clearly been sent to check on the situation, probably by other staff members who had noticed the gathering of well-dressed women in the back area. Her presence seemed to embolden Victoria and Cordelia, who now had a larger audience for their performance. "Beverly," Victoria called out with false sweetness, "we were just having a discussion with your employee here about appropriate workplace attitudes. I'm concerned that she may not be the right fit for events of this caliber. Professional service requires a certain understanding of one's role and responsibilities." Beverly's discomfort was visible as she tried to navigate between appeasing her wealthy clients and protecting her staff member. "I'm sure any concerns can be addressed," she said diplomatically. "Everyone here is committed to providing excellent service for tonight's important cause." But Cordelia wasn't satisfied with Beverly's diplomatic response. "The issue isn't commitment," she said dismissively. "The issue is attitude and understanding of appropriate professional boundaries. When guests provide feedback, the correct response is acknowledgement and improvement, not argumentative discussions about social theory." I watched Beverly's face as she processed this information, clearly trying to determine what had actually happened while managing the political dynamics of the situation. Her livelihood depended on maintaining relationships with wealthy clients like Victoria and Cordelia, but she also had responsibilities to her staff. The power imbalance was stark and uncomfortable to witness. "Perhaps," Beverly said carefully, "we could discuss any specific concerns privately, so as not to disrupt the evening's service." She was trying to de-escalate the situation while maintaining everyone's dignity, but Victoria had no interest in diplomatic solutions. "The disruption," Victoria declared, "comes from employing staff who don't understand their role in events like this one. Professional service means being invisible when not needed, and grateful when acknowledged. It means understanding that guests like ourselves are here to support important causes, and that our comfort and satisfaction should be the primary concern of everyone working tonight." The entitlement was staggering, but what made it worse was the way Victoria framed her selfishness as virtue. In her mind, demanding preferential treatment wasn't narcissistic, it was supporting charity. Her comfort wasn't just personal preference, It was somehow essential to the success of the children's literacy program we were supposedly here to support. Cordelia decided to escalate further, addressing Beverly directly with a tone of authority that brooked no disagreement. I think it would be best if this particular staff member were assigned to duties that don't involve guest interaction. Perhaps there are supplies that need to be organized in storage areas, or other tasks that would be more suitable for someone with her particular attitude challenges. The suggestion was clearly designed to further humiliate me by removing me from any visible role in the evening's activities. In their minds, I was being demoted for the crime of maintaining my dignity in the face of their condescension. But what they didn't realize was that their behavior was being observed not just by me, but by other staff members who were witnessing how wealthy donors treated working people when they thought there would be no consequences. Beverly looked increasingly uncomfortable as the situation escalated beyond her ability to manage diplomatically. She was caught between the demands of powerful clients and her own sense of fairness, a position that highlighted the impossible situations that service workers faced when dealing with entitled customers. Her hesitation spoke volumes about the power dynamics that governed these interactions. I think, Beverly said slowly, that everyone here is committed to making tonight's event successful. Perhaps we could focus on that shared goal and address any other concerns after the evening concludes. It was a reasonable suggestion, but reason had left the conversation long ago. Victoria's response revealed the true depth of her sense of entitlement. Beverly, I don't think you understand the situation here. This isn't about tonight's event, it's about standards and expectations for future events. If your staffing choices reflect poorly on the organizations we support, that becomes a serious concern for ongoing relationships. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria was using her position as a donor and board member to pressure Beverly into disciplining me for the crime of maintaining my self-respect. It was a perfect example of how economic power could be weaponized to enforce social hierarchies, ensuring that people in service positions remained properly subservient to their supposed betters. As the confrontation continued, I found myself thinking about all the other service workers who faced similar situations without the protection of hidden wealth and social position. How many people had been humiliated, demoted, or fired simply for refusing to accept disrespectful treatment? How many had been forced to choose between their dignity and their livelihood, with no safety net to fall back on? The answer was heartbreaking, and it made me more determined than ever to see this experiment through to its conclusion. These women needed to understand that their behavior had consequences. That treating people poorly based on perceived social position was not just wrong, but potentially costly. They needed to learn that you never know who you're really talking to, and that arrogance and entitlement could lead to unexpected revelations. Just as Victoria was launching into another lecture about appropriate workplace attitudes, I heard a familiar voice calling from the main event area. Even through the service area walls, Nathaniel's distinctive tone carried clearly as he addressed someone near the entrance. My heart began to race as I realized that the moment of truth was approaching, that this elaborate social experiment was about to reach its climactic conclusion. Cordelia and Victoria were too focused on their performance of dominance to notice the change in atmosphere, but Beverly's expression shifted as she recognized something significant was happening. The background noise from the main hall had changed subtly, conversations becoming more animated as word spread that the evening's keynote speaker had finally arrived. I believe, I said quietly, setting down the glass I'd been washing, that things are about to become very interesting. My words confused the women who had been lecturing me, but Beverly's eyes widened with dawning understanding. She had recognized Nathaniel's voice and was beginning to piece together the implications of what had been happening in her service area. The transformation in the main hall was immediately audible as Nathaniel's presence energized the crowd. Conversations grew louder and more excited, and I could hear people positioning themselves to be introduced to the evening's most important donor. What none of them realized was that their treatment of his wife was about to become the most expensive lesson in human decency they had ever received. Victoria and Cordelia remained oblivious to the changing dynamics, still focused on establishing their dominance over what they perceived as a troublesome staff member. But their performance was about to become the centerpiece of a much larger drama, one that would expose their true character to everyone present and cost them more than they could imagine. As footsteps approached the service area and Nathaniel's voice grew closer, I prepared myself for the revelation that would change everything. The social experiment was about to conclude, but the lessons it would teach were just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.